Welcome to Tutorial Zone, where we simplify complex concepts. Before we dive deeper into this lesson, please make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you share, make sure you comment, and turn on your notification button so that every time I post a new video, you should be updated. This is going to be part 1 of the introduction to basic human anatomy and physiology. I am Dr. Said Piri, so let us begin. And here are the objectives of this lesson. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to do the following. You should be able to define anatomy and physiology and identify several branches of each. You should be able to state the levels of structural organization of the human body. You should be able to list and explain the 6 essential life processes of the human body required for survival and normal functioning. Let us look at the definition of anatomy and physiology. How would you define anatomy? Anatomy is the science that is concerned with the study of the body structure. These structures that are studied in anatomy would be very large structures that are macroscopic, meaning you can study these structures by using the naked eyes. You do not need a microscope. These structures, you can weigh them, you can manipulate them, you can measure them, and so on. Then there are also those structures that are very small, that are microscopic. These structures require the use of a microscope. They cannot be studied by the naked eyes. Then, unlike anatomy, physiology is the study of the body's functions. In physiology, you are studying the function of those organs, studying the functions of the body structures, and how they perform those functions. So whereas anatomy is the science of the structure, physiology is the science of the body's functions. Another important concept that I would like you people to understand is that the structure of an organ mirrors the function, or the structure of an organ determines its function. Understand what this means. I'm going to explain about the heart. The heart is very much important in pumping blood other areas of the body. This blood can only be pumped when the heart contracts and generates a force that can squeeze this blood out to the other parts of the body. So what makes this heart to be able to pump blood are these muscles located in this part of the heart where I'm shading right now. Those muscles have the ability to contract, and as they are contracting, they're generating the force that is required to pump blood out of this heart to all areas of the body. And in such a way, you can see that this structure of the heart is determining its function. But those muscles that are present in the heart are the ones that enable it to perform its function. Another example that I can give are the teeth. The teeth are very much important in tearing food particles, grinding them, or crushing them so that they are edible or they are easy for you to swallow. If you look at some of these teeth, their structure is specialized in a way that they are very sharp and it's easy for them to tear the food, and others are specialized, or their structure is in a way that they are easy. They are making it easy for them to grind or crush the food particles for them to be swallowed. Just like any other science discipline, anatomy also has areas of specialization. Some of these areas of specialization or subdivisions of anatomy include surface anatomy. In this type of anatomy, or in this area of specialization, you are studying the external body structures and how these structures relate to the internal structures. So for example, you can look at bony markings or bony landmarks, bony structures that you can feel on the surface, you can visualize on the surface, you can perform palpation. Palpation means you can feel for these bony markings. For example, you can feel for artery pauses, for example, in this anatomy. You are not doing any cutting in surface anatomy. There is no cutting or dissection that is done. You're just studying structures on the surface based on what you can see or what you can feel from the body surface. Then gross anatomy, here you're studying macroscopic structures, those structures that are visible to the unaided eye, meaning there is no need of a microscope. You do not use a microscope, you're just using your naked eyes. And here, unlike surface anatomy, gross anatomy proceeds by studying those structures using dissection or cutting. So dissection is performed in anatomy. You cut through these structures, you study the nerves, the muscles, the bones, and so on. So you start from the surface, you also go deeper into cutting, you go into the internal structures as well and see what they have. So for example, the heart, you can study it on the surface, you check out what is present on the surface, and then you cut it open, you see how these structures on the surface relate to those structures that are present on the inside. Anatomists study anatomy using two general approaches. It's either they can use a systemic approach, which is known as systemic anatomy, where anatomists in systemic approach, they study organs or structures that are unique to a certain system. For example, they can study structures that are unique to the respiratory system. They can study structures that are unique to the GIT, the digestive system, and so on. Then in regional approach or regional anatomy, anatomists tend to study structures confined to a specific body region. The best example I can give here is the abdomen. So they're going to study the muscles present in the abdomen, the organs, the nerves, the blood vessels, and how they are related to one another, as well as how they are related to their function that is unique to that particular body region. How are these structures present in the abdomen perform their functions, and how are they related to one another in order for them to perform the function unique to this body region. Another subdivision of anatomy is developmental anatomy, where you study how an individual develops from the point the egg is fertilized by an ovum all the way to adult form. The best example is embryology, where you study how the human body develops from the point the ovum is fertilized or the egg is fertilized by the spermatozoa up to the point this adult or this human being is born, the fetus is born. So embryology is an example of developmental anatomy. Other subdivisions of anatomy include histology, which is the study of tissues. Tissues are a group of cells that perform a specific function or a specialized function. And in histology, we study these tissues using a microscope. There are four fundamental tissues that we are going to look at in this course: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So we're going to study epithelial tissues together with connective tissues. We're going to study muscle tissue under muscular system and nervous tissue under the nervous system. So this is how tissues look like under a microscope. You can see this is the epithelial tissue, connective tissue, and the muscle tissue there. Then cytology. Cytology also requires the use of a microscope. But this time around, instead of us studying tissues, we are studying the individual cell and its organelles or its structures. So that's the difference between cytology and histology. They both use a microscope quite alright, but in histology we study tissues. In cytology we are studying the cell and its cellular structures or individual organelles. This table is further summarizing the subspecialties or some disciplines or subdivisions of both anatomy and physiology. So this side you have the subspecialties of anatomy, embryology, cell biology, histology, and so on, including pathological anatomy and radiographic anatomy. Their descriptions are being shown here on the right side of each. Just like anatomy, physiology also has some subdivisions. For example, neurophysiology where you're studying the functional properties of the nerve cells, how these nerve cells generate electrical signals, how do they transmit those electrical signals, and so on. In endocrinology, you're looking at the hormones and how they control the body functions. Then you can also talk about respiratory physiology, where you're looking at the functions of the air passageways as well as the lungs and how they perform those functions of gaseous exchange, how does ventilation happen, and so on. So you can just take time to look at this table and see or familiarize yourself with the different subspecialties of physiology as well as anatomy. Before we study the different structures of the human body, it is very important that you understand its basic architecture. That is how the smallest parts are assembled to form larger parts. So we're going to do that by studying the levels of organizations, which are arranged from the smallest or the least complex to the largest or the most complex. Coming in as the first level of organization is the chemical level of organization. You have to understand that all matter is made up of elements. All matter is made up of elements, and these elements include hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. There are some other elements, but I've just mentioned a few: hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Now, these elements, they contain atoms. Two or more atoms can form molecules such as water, proteins, carbohydrates that can be found in a living organism. These molecules can come together to form the organelles that form a cell. So the second level of organization from the chemical level of organization, which has atoms and molecules, is the cellular level of organization. A cell is the smallest fundamental and functional unit of a living organism. It is the one that is capable of performing functions, or most of the functions are going to be performed by the cell, or they are going to be initiated by the cell, that are needed for survival or that are needed to meet the physiological needs of this organism. Then the next level of organization is the tissue level of organization, where two or more cells come together to form a tissue. And a tissue is a group of cells that perform a specific function. There are four fundamental tissues that we're going to look at: epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscular tissue, as well as the nervous tissue. So we're going to look at each individual tissue in details later on in this course. These tissues can also come together to form an organ. Two or more tissues can come together to form an organ. An example of an organ that has been given here is the stomach. So when you look at this stomach here, you are going to find that it is made up of those tissues that I've just mentioned. But you have to remember that those tissues are not studied using the naked eye because they are microscopic. You need the microscope for you to study them. Then these tissues can also these organs can come together and then form a system. And this system is going to perform a unique or specialized function based on the organs that are located. For example, here the digestive system, as you can see, is very much important in digestion, absorption of nutrients, as well as removal of waste materials through feces. Then these systems, a group of systems, are going to form this large organism, which is a human being capable of performing the functions that are needed for it to survive. I've explained everything that is on these slides in the previous slide. I'll just quickly run through the chemical level of organization: atoms and molecules. Atoms come together to form molecules. Molecules come together to form organelles that form a cell. A cell, which is More complex in comparison to the chemical level of organization is the structure and functional unit of an organism. It is the level that is capable of performing functions that are needed to meet the physiological needs of that organism. After the cellular level of organization, we now have tissues, a group of cells that work together to perform a similar function. The epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. This is the muscle tissue. This is the epithelial tissue. This is a connective tissue, and this one is the nervous tissue. This slide is showing the organ level of organization. As you can see, the stomach here has been used as an example. It has the epithelial tissue, in this case, it has the nervous tissue, it has a connective tissue, it has a smooth muscle tissue, and blood is also another type of connective tissue that we're going to discuss briefly. But even on this channel, there are videos on blood, so just take time to look at those videos if you want more information. The next level in line is a system level. So you can see how different systems work together to perform the functions that are necessary for survival or the functions that are required to meet the physiological needs of the body. The respiratory system is there to perform the function of taking in oxygen and taking out carbon dioxide. It's there to perform the function of respiration, gaseous exchange, and so on. Then the cardiovascular system is made up of the heart, the blood vessels, as well as the blood. The blood is there to transport these gases to the various tissues of the body. The heart is there to pump blood to those various places of the body, while the blood vessels are there to act as the conduit. Then, once these cells have metabolized, their waste that is produced is there to be removed by the kidneys through the urine. Then the GIT, as you can see, the digestive system, as you can see, is there to bring in the food particles that contain the nutrients which are taken into the bloodstream and transported by blood to the cells, while also removing waste materials through the feces. Then the integumentary system, which is the skin and the sweat glands, the nails, and so on, are there to protect the body from the external environment. So in this way, you can see how systems work together to perform those functions that are necessary for survival as well as to maintain homeostasis. As we're going to see in the next part of the video, we're going to talk about homeostasis and feedback systems. So stay tuned and look out for that video. Living organisms perform 6 important life processes that differentiate them from non-living organisms. And these 6 life processes include: a living organism should be able to perform metabolism, should be able to perform responsiveness, should be able to perform movement, should be able to undergo growth, should be able to have differentiation as well as reproduction. So we're going to look at each one of these life processes in the next slides. We can now look at metabolism. So metabolism is simply just defined as all the chemical reactions that are present in the body or that occur in the body cells. So we're talking about the sum total chemical reactions that occur in the body cells. And these reactions have got 2 phases, catabolism and anabolism. The catabolic phase or the catabolism phase is a phase where larger molecules are broken down into smaller ones. So for example, you have a protein that is a large molecule is being broken down to an individual amino acid or to individual amino acids which are smaller molecules. Then in anabolism, smaller molecules are put together to form larger molecules. So that's what metabolism is all about. Then a living organism should be able to perform responsiveness, which is the ability to sense and respond to a change in the internal or the external environment. The best example I can give here is the withdrawal reflex, and this withdrawal reflex is a response towards a painful stimulus. For example, you can talk about someone touching a hot object. immediately they are going to withdraw their hand away from that hot object. So that ability to detect that, okay, this is a hot object and it is painful, and respond through removal of the hand, which is a withdrawal reflex, is known as responsiveness. Then with movement or contractility, you can talk about it under 3 topics. Number 1 is either talking about movement of the whole organism or part of the body of that organism, where an organism moves from point A to point B. Then you can also talk about in terms of movement of the individual organs in an organism. Here the organs, the best example I can give, for example, is the gallbladder. The gallbladder stores bile, and after a fatty meal, the gallbladder can start contracting to release that bile to the small intestine. That is very much important in the digestion of that fatty meal that you have just taken. So movement of the individual organ can also happen. Or we can also talk about movement of the individual cell. An example that I can give here is the white blood cells. The white blood cells, after an infection has occurred, the white blood cells have the ability to move out of the bloodstream to that area where the infection is and fight off that infection or fight off that invading microorganism. So with movement, it's either it's movement of body parts where a whole organism moves, or to be movement of substances. For example, in the gallbladder, as the gallbladder is contracting, it is moving the bile into the small intestine, or it could be movement of individual cells. Then the other life processes, the fourth one is growth. Growth simply means an increase in the size of the body part of an organism, or the increase in an organism itself. So do not confuse growth with differentiation. Growth is an increase in body size, and I'm going to explain what differentiation is later on. So an organism or a body part can increase in size by increasing the number of cells or increasing the size of cells. To some extent, they're going to increase the size of cells, but it will grow by increasing the number of cells. And like I've said, to some extent, sometimes an organism or a body part can also grow by increasing the size of the cells. Then reproduction, which is the fifth one. Production, it can be talked about under 2. It's either it's reproduction at cellular level, which is known as cell division, or it's 2 organisms or 2 individuals, male and female, using their reproductive system to produce another individual, to produce another offspring. At cellular division, a cell can divide into 2 or more other cells for the purpose of growth as well as for repair. So reproduction is either cell division or 2 individuals using their reproductive system to produce another offspring. Then differentiation. Unlike growth, differentiation here, you have a cell that is unspecialized, that it doesn't have the ability to perform a specific function, and this cell changes to a cell that has the ability to perform a specific function. The best example I can say is the white blood cells and the red blood cells all develop from one cell, and those cells are known as the stem cells. Then this stem cell can either become a red blood cell or it can become a white blood cell. This white blood cell has the ability to fight off infections. The red blood cell has the ability to transport gases. But if you look at this parent cell, which is a stem cell, it cannot perform this function of fighting off infection. It cannot perform the function of transporting of the gases. So that process by which this stem cell becomes a specific cell that has the ability to perform a specific function is known as differentiation. So do not confuse differentiation with growth. With that, viewers, we have come to the end of this part 1 of the introduction to human anatomy and physiology. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you share, make sure you like, make sure you comment, and watch out for the other parts of this lecture so that you get to have more information on the introduction to basic human anatomy and physiology. Until next time, thank you very much.